Hey, welcome to Everyday Torah. I'm going to do a few different things on the channel, or if you're in the class, I want to do a thing just called a forum. We might not have all the same backgrounds, but just a way to open up theological conversation. And I've got Laura with me today. She is in my present Fuller course, and it's called IS 501, Practices of Worship. And to talk about what worship is way beyond music and understanding that worship primarily is engaging the narrative of God, the story of God. What is the story of the kingdom? How does God want to be worshiped? And to try to find a rubric for understanding of how we might evaluate worship to know whether or not we're walking in a way that exalts Jesus as Savior and Lord. And so this is Laura. Laura and I don't know each other a whole lot other than just introductory stuff at our course. Laura, if you could tell our listeners just a bit about yourself, where you live, maybe a little bit about your family, that would be great.
Awesome. So my name is Laura Cortez, or Cortez, and I'm in San Antonio, Texas. I'm 41. I am a teacher by trade or a profession. I teach middle school social studies. So that is a whole lot of fun and a whole lot of work also too. But it's something that has been, I've just always wanted to be a teacher since I was a little girl. So I guess I'm living my dream. But now I'm also a seminary student, and I feel sometimes like I started a little late because I'm already in my 40s, but it's better late than never. I am married to David. We've been married almost 14 years now in June, and don't have any children. But we do have 3 dogs that fill our house with plenty of noise and love. And that's kind of a quick rundown of who I am.
So So tell me about why'd you choose seminary?
Well, I just, I love learning. I love God. And I wanted to put those two together and just to be able to know as much as possible of Him. And I felt that I was missing some tools, some skills in being able to discern His word, and being able to engage people in that same kind of study
Mm-hmm.
and learning. And so just, as a teacher by craft or by gift, I also wanted to, be teaching for building the kingdom as opposed to just in public school. So there's a part of me that has always wanted to do this. Unfortunately, I feel that because I'm a woman, that wasn't something that was cultivated in me or encouraged in me, to go to seminary. Um, I think it's there's a lot of baggage with that, but I've had a lot of support with my husband, being the encourager and being the one to say, this is in you. It's what you're supposed to be doing. It's what you do now, and so do it. And then that's how I got started.
Yeah. I know the male female thing is another topic, but yeah, boy, so many times have I seen the Bible used as a oppressive tool in wrong ways, and yeah, so sorry about that.
No need to apologize.
Well,
I'm over it, and
I
I'm
know,
doing my thing now.
I know, and one of the things that what in our class, it's called Vocation and Formation group. Who's your VF group leader?
Carlos.
Carlos. Okay, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
One of the VF group leaders is Heidi. Heidi and I meet on the side, and she's doing a lot of study in the Torah about male-female relationships,
Oh,
and
okay.
it is. It's been interesting for me to hear her talk about it, and yeah. So anyway, she might be a brain to pick at some point.
I will certainly try to make contact with her.
Yeah.
I think because that's just been part of my own origin story, and because of the nature of my work and where I work at a more at-risk school, I I do tend to bend more towards social justice issues and issues of equality and So that's just, I always try to see things from that angle and try to see if there's any way to iron those places out.
Yeah.
In whatever, whether it's at my school or at my church or in my marriage or wherever, with family. So,
Right. Yeah, on maybe we'll get to that topic too. And we will get to it because I know that was a question that you were thinking about asking. One of the joys that I get to share with people, because I am a Torah observant believer, is that the Torah, God's instruction, and let me just define that word. Torah means God's instruction and righteousness. That's it. So when James talks about caring for orphan and widow, these are social justice issues that are all outlined in the Torah. Yahweh wanted to create a kingdom by which people were treated well, were treated equally in the kingdom. And so it doesn't mean that we can just do whatever we want. I mean, sin is still sin. But as far as a person, they were able to be grafted into Israel with all the rights and privileges thereof, and maybe we'll get to talk about that a bit more. Now, so I know from the course that we go in modules, and even though I've explained for our listeners, the overall trajectory of the course is what does it mean to walk in in God's story or the narrative of the kingdom. And what I mean by that, I think people really get like, whoa, what does that mean? How do we equate worship to walking in the narrative? The reason the narrative is so important is that the instruction of God is designed to exalt Jesus. And so even when we talk about Sabbath, ultimately, the one covenant that was given to us that we might do things to exalt Jesus. And so when we treat people well, when we love God and love neighbor, we are exalting Jesus. And so what happens is God's instruction is designed to help us do things in a way that exalt Jesus. And whether we're singing about that, we want to sing about it properly, where we're walking in obedience, every part of our life, when we're doing that, we exalt Jesus. Now, why Sabbath then? Because it's a sign of that particular covenant. And I find it so interesting that the very covenant that was given to Israel that has a bunch of things to do, a bunch of works, the one thing that was given as the sign was to rest. Because ultimately, it isn't about our works. We can walk in that way to exalt Jesus, but ultimately, who exalts Jesus? It's Yahweh, the Father. Ultimately, we don't work to get anywhere. Ultimately, we rest in the finished work of our Messiah. So the sign was given that we might remember that, understand that. There's, I think, a betrothal going on of sorts, and maybe we'll get into that as well. But you come from a background, and I think everyone should know about it. Tell me just a bit about your church life. You also observe the Sabbath. What church tradition do you come from? How does that work for you?
Well, my denomination, I guess specifically, is the Church of God, Seventh Day. Sometimes we get a little confused with the Adventist group, although I think in our history as a denomination, we may have branched from the Adventist group, but we're an entity separate from that. And so I have been Sabbathing since in utero, so it's something that I grew up in. I've got probably about 2 or 3 generations in with my grandparents and great-grandparents. We, for us, the Sabbath is Friday evening to Saturday evening, which I guess is a more traditional biblical understanding of Saturday or of the Sabbath. And so there's been a lot of different ways that has looked throughout my life. Growing up, it was a very conservative view of not working, not buying, not trading, doing as much to be able to prepare ahead of the day so that even like no cooking kinds of observance. And there's no set rules or set requirements of what to do on our Sabbath or what not to do. But from my church, my grandfather being my first pastor was very conservative on that end and very strict. So I think because of that, I feel a little bit more flexibility now in observing the Sabbath, where it doesn't have to feel so legalistic and so predetermined in how to observe the Sabbath. And I've had to, I think, broaden my understanding of what the Sabbath even means, so that I can kind of set for myself what that's going to look like as far as observance and how that day is supposed to go. But it has always been such a blessing for me to have the Sabbath. It's very difficult for me to imagine not doing what I do on Saturday or working on Saturday, or I know by Friday I'm like running on fumes. I just can't wait to drop everything to have that day begin. And so that's a little bit of the background. Today, I feel like it has become a day that's hard to navigate with COVID and all of the things that I'm used to doing on the Sabbath, of meeting with my faith community and having it be a shared experience, that has been interrupted very much. And so I think the last year we've been figuring out how to continue to have that same experience when we're not able to be together.
Right. So. Yeah. Even in my community, we're using Zoom as an ancillary tool for those who, either can't show up in person or, whatever, or health issues or whatever. Okay. So here you are, this Seventh Day Sabbath keeper person. You grew up in this tradition. I'm sure people, of course, you've talked about Seventh Day Adventist. I'm sure people wondered why you're trying to be Jewish. Maybe you've had that conversation every so often. You came to Fuller and you were surprised, I think, about this dialogue or directive, I guess, to not ignore Sabbath keeping. So what has been your experience at Fuller on that topic? What surprised you? How are you feeling about it?
One thing that I was surprised with is the literature that's out there on Sabbath keeping. I was not aware that, people outside of, Seventh Day Sabbatarians were writing about the Sabbath and speaking about it as a spiritual practice and as a, like you said, a directive that should not be ignored. And so finding, being able to read that material and all of that literature, that's been a blessing. I was like, I didn't know that this was out there. People were talking about this. So I've been trying to consume as much of that as I can. But also the way that it seems to be expressed sometimes, like in my VF group, we were speaking about our experiences of Sabbathing as far as our, the tasks that we were given, the week that we were learning about that. And it still feels very individual from the people that, were saying, well, on my Sabbath, I do this, or this is what I like to focus on, when I'm Sabbathing. And as though it's a practice that we should do individually, like we would do solitude, or like we would do prayer, or lectio divina, things like that. And that's not at all my feel for the Sabbath. It's a very communal thing. It's something that I do in community. And if I am by myself on the Sabbath, there's a sense of loss of not having been able to fully Sabbath. Yeah.
Yeah. So for our listeners, I live in kind of two worlds. I live in the Torah world, where I am seeking to articulate for my evangelical friends why it is that I have chosen to observe the practices that we would find in the Torah. Now, when I say that, what I mean is I observe all of it, but there are some things you just can't do. It would be unlawful to do many things. The temple or tabernacle doesn't exist, and there's just a lot of things you can't do. And I always tell people, if you really want to know what the Torah looks like, look at the life of Jesus. It doesn't look legalistic. It looks very spiritual, very awesome. So that's what it looks like done right. If you want to look at it done wrong, look at the Pharisees, Sadducees. I've probably botched it up a few times, but the goal is to be like Jesus. Now, on the Sabbath, it is something that is taught at the seminary where we're at, and there's just so many different viewpoints. So even in my course, I'm very careful to not use it as a bully pulpit. I don't want to ever do anything in our class that is my way or the highway. It's a discussion. It is looking at the scriptures, trying to understand what is the intent of these practices. Interestingly to me, when I accepted the invitation to teach IS 501 practices of worship, that I didn't have to insert Sabbath. That was actually something that was given to me, that was decided by the curricular group. And I'm thinking, cool, this is something that I can be down with because it's near and dear to my heart. Now, that said, it does, to me, across the board, feel exactly as you've described. Sabbath-Keeping in Dorothy Bass's view, which is one of the books that we read, I think it's called Practicing Faith. It migrates Sabbath from the seventh day to the first day, is what she does. We also read Abraham Heschel, and that comes from a Jewish perspective. But I totally agree with you, is that there's an individual aspect. And I think what happens is when students first engage the Sabbath, which I'm happy about, you're engaging it for the first time, perhaps you've never been taught, you don't know. And so what happens is people tend to view the practice itself through their own worldview, through their own way of how they have engaged all the other practices, which tends to be individual, which tends to be my relationship with God. And they just haven't learned, or they're exploring. And I just want you to know, Laura, on my end, I'm just happy to have the conversation. I'm happy to begin talking about it. And what does it mean? And why is the community part so important? Mm-hmm. Now, in Exodus 23, when it introduces the appointed times, or some people will hear that in Hebrew, Moedim, or feast days, the very first thing before God outlines the feast days is the Sabbath. He said, hey, keep this, and you are to have a holy convocation. And the holy convocation is we assemble together as God's people. And one of the things that I think ultimately is dear to our Father's heart is that he is fashioning a people, a bride, a nation. And it is a we thing. And I don't know, you come, how do you refer to it? Do you refer to it as Hispanic culture, Mexican culture? How do you refer?
One.
Okay, either one.
I still don't know.
Look, I sometimes get my hands spanked, honestly, because I'm not sure.
It depends on who you ask.
Okay.
Some might say, oh, no, we're Hispanic, but that calls out to Spain, which is colonial, or some say, Mexican. I'm like, well, but I'm Mexican, I guess. I'm not Mexican nationally. I'm an American. Well,
you can imagine as a white male, I get my hands spanked regularly. I try not to step.
Hispanic's great. We'll use Hispanic.
I try to not step on the landmines. But here's what I do know is that the white culture has tended to be an individualist culture, whereas Hispanic culture will be corporate or collectivist. And so because of that, I think that there is a natural predisposition for some cultures to understand the community aspect a whole lot better. And that's one of the things I think it's so important for us to do theology together. It's because a Hebrew culture is an Eastern culture. They're a collectivist culture. They didn't think in terms of me. They think in terms of we. And what we tend to do is we tend to, at least for me as an individual culture, is to put my cultural biases back onto the text, read it how I want it. So Sabbath becomes a me and God day, or just a me day, or how do I rest day, instead of seeing myself as a part of a larger body of Messiah. And we come together and we rest together, and this is pleasing to our King. So, as we work through that topic, one of the things that I wish I could do in our class, and I just don't want to create a situation where people are willing to engage the conversation, and then I start telling them a bunch of, well, here's how you do it. Here's how you do it. I can tell you what I do and why theologically the corporate aspect is so important. So if I were to say theologically why that corporate aspect is important is, yes, take a nap if you can. Take a walk by yourself. There's a whole 24 hours there. You're not going to meet with your community for 24 hours. So there's plenty of time left over for just your nice walk. But to be together and to have that as a foreshadow of worship, and the foreshadow meaning throughout the week, we do all things to glorify our God. But then we come together and we demonstrate. It's a very political activity. I'm stopping from the world and the tyranny of the world and the world system. I'm stopping. I'm saying, nope, I can't make my life happen on my own. I cannot make enough money. I cannot make everything go right. I can't make myself better before God. It is God by His Spirit that is in me, and together we come and we're operating as a community, and when we worship God together on the Sabbath, we are saying, no, this is our identity. And we need each other. We need the Father. And, watching world needs to see that.
I think it also takes away from the transactionality of our world, when we're careful to not impose, like you're saying, not just tell people, well, this is what you should do and how you should observe Sabbath. There is an element of how are you going to do it that you have to think about, and that you should think about, I guess, individually, but also how then can you incorporate yourself into a group that's going to do it together, and then how are you going to do that with your group? And it's funny that you bring in the different cultural aspects of it. My denomination is around the country, and even here in San Antonio, my particular community is bilingual. So we do, and you probably saw in the video of our service that we're in English and Spanish, but there are some congregations that are all English and predominantly white. And a lot of those congregations will meet just once in the morning. But if you go to one of our Hispanic congregations, they meet all day. They have a morning service, eat lunch together, have another service in the afternoon that may go into the evening to close the Sabbath. So, there's lots of ways to be about it. And I think that that's part of the design, or part of the I can't even think of the word. It's like a fleshing out, I guess, as a body, that you get to decide that together.
Yeah.
What are we going to do?
So the commandment basically says, keep the Sabbath, keep it holy or separate. Don't do any regular work. There's a couple of Hebrew words that the author, Moses, that's who I'm saying is the author, could have chose, avodah or menuha, but it's just no regular work. And that doesn't mean that if you see a donkey in a pit and the donkey, you need to work to get the donkey out, it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. But it is a day of not buying or selling. And people, I'll get caught on this one. I'm supposed to be resting. Why can't I go out to eat? And for me, I say, hey, Yahweh is seeking that all creation rests. And Yahweh is not only just concerned about me, He's concerned about the worker at the restaurant. And so let the birdies rest. Let the workers rest. Let them rest. Because if you take advantage of them, you are basically putting them to work. And so the command is that we rest. So what you haven't read Brueggemann quite yet, I don't think. But
I've gotten started.
But Brueggemann on I think it's chapter 6 talks about Israel at play. There is plenty of wiggle room in how it is that we go about observing the commandment of Sabbathing. And the reason I bring that up is because sometimes I think people think, Trav, you're doing Torah stuff. This is, isn't this what Peter is talking about? That is so restrictive. And I'm like, no. I've done it for like over a decade now, all the commandments. And when Jesus, Yeshua, says, my burden, my yoke is easy and my burden is light, I take it from a guy who's been doing it. It really is not that complicated. It really is pretty easy. There's plenty of latitude in how you do it. But I think what you're getting at, Laura, I think is very important, is how do we get at also the spirit of the commandment itself as believers to be together, to worship, to come together as a believing community in the way that they would have done in Acts. We read Acts 2 and we all love it so much.
Right.
And that's what they're doing. And, here's another thing too is, scholars pretty much know that I'm just going to say it without mincing words. The biblical Sabbath is on the seventh day. You can't get around that. But of course, what happened in the early development of Orthodoxy or Catholicism is that the separation from the Jewish community happened. And it happened for all kinds of number of reasons, but it was associated with the resurrection of Jesus. And I can appreciate all that. I have no issues with that. I get that. And I don't want to, at least in a seminary context, say, hey, I'm right, you're wrong. I'm not going to do that. But I'll tell you why I do what I do, because Sabbath-keeping helps me on a weekly cycle play into, and that's, look at Leviticus 23, but it helps me play into Leviticus 25, where you have the 7-year cycle of the Shemitah years, and then you go into seven sevens, 7 Shemitah years, and then we have the Jubilee year. So in other words, it all fits together and it forms us theologically. Now, back to the community thing that I think that the Hispanic culture has. I grew up, it was Calvary Vineyard, and then I went to Baptist, and that switch moved me from about 3 hours on a Sunday down to an hour on a Sunday, and I became accustomed to this shorter time. And then because I worked at a mega church, you were out on the dot. And so my world got smaller, it became more performative, performance-oriented. They came in, they consumed our theology and our music, and then they went out. And don't get me wrong, it was fine. It was good. But my communal world shrunk. So, and that fell nicely in line with my desire to do what I want to do, to rest. So when I started doing house church stuff, it's a long story how that happened, but even before I started really falling in the Torah, I wanted to, in many ways, I just wanted to reject consumerism. Our time together became longer, and we enjoyed eating together and so forth. So there was that transition. And then the particular family that often hosts our gatherings today on the seventh-day Sabbath, they're real people. And I love people, but people kind of wear me out. So right now we are there at 10:30 in the morning, and we are rarely done before 3.
Yeah. And
it could go till 4. And I've had to stretch my capacity for people loving quite a lot. And I think part of it is, I want to go, I'm tired, which is legitimately true because I'm more of a, I can't say I'm all the way introvert, but my cultural milieu just kind of allows for my individualism. Now, all that said, when you talk about going on into the evening, in Acts 2, in the book of Acts, when you see them talking about they were gathered on the first day of the week, you got to remember the sun went down.
Right, that was in the evening.
Yeah, so I think it's Acts 16. And a lot of people confuse that they're meeting on the first day of the week, and that's not what is happening. They had no television. They're a collectivist culture, and they started with their Sabbath, coming together communally, learning from Paul or whoever, meeting in the synagogues. And on that particular day, the sun had gone down, but they were reconvening and being communal and corporate together, worshiping the Lord, learning about God, especially because Paul was in the area. And so this guy knows the Lord. This guy is going
the most of the time you have.
Yeah.
with
And
him.
so exactly, just like we would with any respected teacher that we have. And so they stayed on into the evening. And that's what you're reading about there. So it's not just trying to interpret what's happening with the Sabbath and the first day. When you read that in Acts, it's also about the collectivist culture that they had, and something that I think that the Hispanic community is very helpful on, that I can learn from. You follow, right?
No, yeah, I totally understand. Being and I visited other churches on Sunday, and it feels disconnected when you walk out the door, and it's like, well, I don't know what to do now. I mean, it's kind of over. I guess the time's over, and it feels cut short.
Yeah. So what does your Sabbath look like? And I'll describe mine too.
Yeah, so Friday nights is more of a kind of a putting on the brakes, and I would say maybe 2 to 3, Fridays out of the month. It's just my husband and I having dinner. It's a little bit more of a, I don't want to say a nicer dinner, but we like to kind of make a thing of it. And about once or twice a month, we would meet with others. I don't really want to say that we did Shabbat, because there's nothing formal about it, or nothing, liturgical or that goes along with the traditional Shabbat. But we would, that was kind of our intention, was to meet together on Friday to bring in the Sabbath and eat a lot of food and just enjoy each other's company. So that I definitely missed doing because of COVID, that we weren't able to do that anymore.
Right.
So hopefully we can get back to that. But so then Saturday mornings, we do have our service. Right now we're starting at 11, but normally it was at 10. And we would do a little bit of Bible study, actually, working out of like a curriculum, that comes through our denomination. And that's also very informal. It's basically, we're just kind of sitting in, not quite at tables in the sanctuary, but, discussing and open answer. And then we would have worship, and our pastor would bring the word. The afternoons, could be spent together having lunch, or some of us would go out to eat and go enjoy lunch together somewhere else. And then we would meet again for an afternoon service of more worship and then more word. And that one, we also incorporate a time of, I suppose you could do like a special song or presentation, but mostly it was a testimonial time and confession time. That was a part of our service. A lot of times, depending on, where people were in our congregation and what they were sharing, that may have taken up the entire afternoon service, the 2-hour service that we had. And our pastor wouldn't have been able to deliver his message. We were already at 5 o'clock. I personally in that time have done a lot of confessing of my own struggles and my own hangups, especially when I started to come into the acknowledging the fact that I struggle with anxiety. And so that was part of my my healing, was to be able to tell everyone that that's what I was struggling with. And that's where I did it, was at church during that service and during that confessional time. And we've had, I think that's what forms our group so much, that we have that time and people are able to share whatever's on their heart, what the Lord's brought them through that week or what he's been talking to them about. but it's also a time for reconciliation if there needs to be between brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
If that's necessary, which, with humans, it always is.
Yeah.
And so that's been such a crucial part, I think, of our time together, that attracted me to this community when I would see that happen. And I thought, I can't believe everybody's getting up and just kind of talking about all their stuff to everyone and just sharing it out there.
Right.
But then it made me realize that how can you not do that?
Yeah, so even Yeshua says, before you come and bring your sacrifice, go and first be reconciled to your brother or sister and come back. So I do think inherent in the practice of Sabbath keeping is that we press into all forms of rest. And one of the forms of rest that I think people neglect when we don't do it corporately is the rest that comes through confession, the rest that comes with just talking openly about our anxiety. You say that, I don't want to turn this into my anxiety time, but I have plenty of that anxiety feeling. I know exactly what that's like. And I've had even plenty of times in my own community where we're not right with each other. And I've seen sometimes in my community more fight or flight than I have confession and humility and just talking through those things so we can rest in that area of our lives. I don't want to sugarcoat things. We're not that great at it, honestly. I try to model it. And am I going to say I'm perfect at it? No. But because I recognize it is a thing that we need to learn, I try to model it for everybody. And it's sometimes hard to do that. So on my end, so right there at sundown on Friday night, we're doing the same thing. Amy, we're empty nesters now. Woohoo! I mean, I love my boys. Don't get me wrong, but it has been, I don't know, a pleasant, good time for me and Amy. And so, and you probably do this too. You've already mentioned it, but throughout the week, we are actively preparing for Sabbath. You have to prepare for it. If you don't, you will, you'll miss your deadlines. You will experience anxiety because you haven't got things done. You're trying to honor the Sabbath, but then, you got this thing going on in the back of your mind too. So, hey, I'm not going to lie. There are times where my days are long because I know Sabbath is coming, and where I would have normally put in, maybe 10 hours of work, I put in 12 because I had to plan for it. So that's number one, is if you're going to have a successful Sabbath, you've got to prep for it. And that was a part of their culture way back when. So anyway, I share that with you. When the sun goes down, even last night, today's Sunday. So on Friday night, Amy lit a candle. It's nothing in particular special. It's just any candle will do. When we're feeling richer, we will go to Trader Joe's or something and get some flowers for the weekend. So that'll be our life thing. Amy and I are not very good at cooking. I would love to have that Sabbath meal together where you're just resting in your own home. So a lot of times Amy and I will go out before sundown and eat, and then we'll come home. And in the seasons where right now it's easy so in California the sun is
in the summer.
It's a little bit longer. But when the sun goes down, we will do the best that we can to just to prepare a simple meal at home, and we'll eat that. The next day, we have our fellowship at 10:30 in the morning. We'll gather. For us, we've got a really good shofar blower, and he'll blow that shofar.
Oh, wow.
He blows it, and then we recite the Shema together. Shema Israel, Yahweh Eloheinu, Yahweh Echad, Baruch. Okay, and then we all go on, and we'll say it together. We've got a nice little cadence working, and then some prayer, and we'll do singing like most congregations will do. And we do try to monitor those words so that way they are directing us toward God and walking in the right narrative. A lot of songs can be a little they're not so theologically rich. And so we want to make sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. So then
We're very mindful of that too.
for sure. Yeah, you got to. And we want to tell the whole story of God, not just the salvation story, but the sanctification story about how we're to be as believers. So we try to get that story into the music. And then we'll have like maybe, 2.5 hours of teaching time. And for us, it's usually an hour of just direct teaching, and then we'll just talk about it. Now, like last Sabbath, we did kind of a 1 Corinthians 14 thing. Everything has a word, a song, a hymn, a word, and we use that format. And it was one of the first times we've used that format where, our teachers take teaching seriously, and because of that, it takes a lot of hours and we get tired. So we just needed a break, and we were kind of nervous about doing this other format, and it worked. The thing is, it worked. People shared, and it was nice and edifying. We had our lunch together, some kind of stew or something, and everyone brings like a potluck thing, and then sometimes we'll play a game. We've got some game players that it's a good way to bring, because sometimes you'll notice in groups that you'll have your talkers. And people who will, they're the natural talkers. And then you have the natural listeners, where the games allow more people to talk. And they're games that are designed to help us share about ourselves so that we can grow together. So that's been kind of a neat little thing that we've done. And yesterday we were done at, I think I was done. I think I left there around 3:45 yesterday. And I came home, took a nap, and I was up at 5 and way up past my bedtime because it was a late nap. And so, that's what we're doing. That's what it looks like for our Sabbath.
Yeah, since we've been online for COVID, we've had just one service. So normally we would have 2 in the day. So now we're down to 1. And it has really given me a lot of space to see what is also doable on the Sabbath. If I can say, we're not supposed to be doing anything, but also there's some things that I can step into. And because we have our morning service, and then the afternoon is, so I do sleep a lot, but I'm a napper. I'll take a 3-hour nap. And so, but also, what can my husband and I do to spend that time together? And it's allowed for a little bit more quality time, the two of us to kind of spend time together, but also venture into just talks and, just about scripture or not about scripture or about our church or family. And it's a different experience than what I've normally had.
So
with the afternoons are free.
Let me ask you, so from what I'm hearing about you, you observe sundown to sundown on the 7th day, and you're not buying or selling. You're together. Is this right? What you're doing?
Mostly no buying or selling, unless we're getting food. So we do. My husband and I will go to eat somewhere or pick something up on occasion.
Okay.
Not every Saturday, but yeah.
And in your community, if you're caught out eating or something, making others work, is there a judgment?
No, I think that there's a lot of grace. And so, and there's also, that's why I was speaking earlier, about what a community or what a congregation is going to see as the right way to do Sabbath. And so, in other groups, there is, well, you're not supposed to do that on the Sabbath. And, if you had prepared better, then you wouldn't have to.
Right.
But with my community, there's not. It's some people don't, buy or sell at all. And that's great. And some people may occasionally, like we do. Some people don't see an issue with it. And it's not a point of contention or judgment. It's what individual choice, I guess.
Yeah. So my perspective on this is that I don't buy or sell. Could there be people in my community that will be judged judgmental. They might feel it, but they'll never they're not. They're nice people. They're not going to do that. What's interesting to me is, for me as a teacher, I feel obligated as a teacher to teach what's in the Scripture. Here's what it says. I mean, if you see it other than I see it, it's just what it says is don't buy or sell. It says to rest, do no regular work. What can I do? I mean, it's the Bible. So because my primary rubric for understanding, my go-to, is not tradition, it's not for me, it's not myself, it's the Scriptures. It says what it says. I can't get around that. So I teach it, but I also can say, hey, look, though, Jesus tells me not to be judgmental. I can make judgments. We are supposed to judge those inside the church. Paul says it. But judge doesn't mean be hurtful. Judge would be like discerning rightly between, hey, we're doing right by God in the kingdom. We're not doing right by God in the kingdom, and we are to lovingly instruct. But judgmental now becomes, I'm now lording this over you, being hurtful to you. I've got this all right, and you've got it all wrong. Hey, look at the rest of my life. I'm speaking for myself. Look at the rest of my life. I've got plenty of infractions, and if you want to go nitpicking, you're going to find plenty of things to go ahead and be judgmental with me on. And I would just say, could you be gracious with me, please? I'm learning, I'm growing. You can, if you want to point out how I can be brought into closer alignment with my Messiah. I want to look like Jesus. I want to be known to my God as one who I take seriously the commandments, and I want to do it both in the right way, but I also want to do it in the right spirit. And if you can help me come in closer alignment, that's part of ironing, sharpening iron. I've got no issue with that. Where I do have an issue is when people start to be hurtful. And so anyway, my approach always, people will ask me, so are you legalistic about it? And I'm going to say, I don't know. I mean, how do you want to define that? My anniversary date with Amy is on July 18th every year. I'm pretty legalistic about doing it on July 18th when we observe our anniversary. I mean, it just is what it is. Nothing I can do about that. I'm trying to observe what I'm supposed to observe. So, but my heart doesn't feel legalistic. It just feels like, that's the day, or that's what I'm supposed to be doing. I never think in terms of legalism. And I do ask this with people sometimes. I'll say, what's the difference between legalism and obedience? It really is a posture of the heart. And, even Yahweh with Passover, so gracious. Hey, if you can't observe Passover at this time, maybe you've been around the dead body, or you're away on a trip, well, do it the second month on the 14th. So even Yahweh is pretty gracious with how he approaches these sorts of things. And so we've talked about that, approaches. You brought up earlier with me before we went live about this idea of social justice. Why is this important to you? And I'm not going to. I don't want to. Social justice sometimes, for me, has a negative connotation in that sometimes I think people focus on the social justice and don't fit it rightly within the kingdom of God. It's like, what I want to say to people is, what we're doing is we are after the kingdom of God. And if we make the kingdom of God our primary concern, social justice is going to happen. I think sometimes people put the cart before the horse. But I'm going to allow you just to talk to me about this. How have you viewed it? Why, you told me this is important to you. Why is it important? Talk to me.
Well, I definitely agree that trying to work social justice, I kind of see it like with our nation, just legislatively is never going to do the trick. Same thing, in church, if we put things into place so that we can say, well, now we're being fair, or now we're being equal. but there's no change in the heart or in the perspective, then it doesn't really matter. But one of the things that I've been, that God's been opening my eyes about in connection to the Sabbath is that in the idea of taking this rest day and having it be a moment of stepping outside of our worlds so that we can make space for God on a larger scale, because we make space for God every day. But for me, the Sabbath is like a larger space and for a specific amount of time. How does that translate for people who don't have a job, right, and are not able to obtain work, or they don't make a living wage, and so they have to work 7 days a week, or they have to work 2 or 3 jobs? How does that? There's this idea of a right to work that God has embedded in the commandment, that you take a Sabbath because you're working, and that you have the responsibility to work, obviously, to provide and to take care of yourself. But there's also the idea that work should be there for people. There should be work for those that are able. So how can you take a Sabbath when you don't have work? Or how can you take a Sabbath when you have to work 7 days a week because you're not getting paid a living wage? Those are the kinds of questions that I'm asking now. And what does the church do, to make that happen for people? Or should the church do anything to make that possible for people? So.
You said a lot there, and I think these are all good thoughts. A book that has influenced me as a student of John Howard Yoder, Lee Camp, and he has this little part in the book where he asks his readers to fill in the blank. What should the blank do about terrorism? What should the blank do about racism? What should the blank do about gun control? What should the blank? And the way he sets it up is that most people are going to put in the word government. Mm-hmm. What he's driving at is we should put in the word church. The extension of the kingdom of God here, the primary responsibility really can't fall on a human government. It falls on a spiritual government. And so reframing how we understand that is, I think, helpful to the conversation. Most of the time I have found that people, you have a conservative ideology, liberal ideology. Maybe I won't reveal what I am, but I'm not.
I don't know what I am either.
The thing is I don't think pitting one against the other is helpful. Mm-hmm. What I would like to do is say that ultimately humans can't solve the problem. Ultimately, it is the Spirit of God through the ecclesia that will solve these issues. So if we start there, another thing is, can you legislate morality? I don't know that you can. I think that good laws are good laws, and let's do good laws. But ultimately, the legislating morality has to come from a Spirit-filled people of God that are doing what they're supposed to be doing. So in that, in many ways, it doesn't matter what the government law says. Let's just say the law says, I can whack people on the head. I'm not going to do that because I'm a follower of Jesus. So the law that I follow doesn't allow me to whack people on the head. So there's a sense in which I exist apart from the government. Now, all that said, you're now talking about working. What if you don't have enough income? All this stuff. I think these are really important questions I get. So let's just talk to legalistic Traver for a second on the Sabbath. Well, hey, if you're saying you can't work on the Sabbath and this person has a job on Saturday, now what, Traver? Are they being disobedient? And I would say, no. There are things that are inside your control and things that are outside your control. And so when the Israelites were under the control of Pharaoh in Egypt, they were not allowed to worship Yahweh. They were not allowed to keep the Sabbath. And I would contend that they knew about Sabbath. at least, through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But let's just take that out of the theological conversation for a moment. I would contend that there are legitimate reasons why you cannot observe. You can't. You're in a particular, Egypt exists in our world. Bondage exists in our world, and there's nothing we can do about it. So I would just say to a person that's in that situation, in as much as stuff is in your control, God knows. God is not a mean God. He's gracious and compassionate, understands your situation. And why don't you pray? Pray, maybe God will take you out of that situation. So there's the working on the Sabbath thing that sometimes it's just outside your control. I've been in that situation. I totally get it. Now on to what about Sabbath keeping when you have no job? I do think you're right. Sabbath keeping substantively is not just about not working a regular job. It's about space. It's about God time. It's about being with the Lord and with community. And because I actually have been without a job, there have been times, Laura, you don't know my background. I keep my food stamp card in my wallet because I've been there. I have actually, I was working at another seminary and I had to leave class early because I had to get over to the welfare office before they closed. I know what it feels like to stand in a welfare line.
Definitely here too.
I know what it feels like to need dental care. And I didn't have any insurance. I had no money. And I'm standing with everybody else down at a free clinic when all the dentists came in to give of their time. I know what that feels like. So I don't know what people think about me, but I've got my food stamp card. I'm not, hallelujah. I haven't lived paycheck to paycheck for at least 3 months. Oh my gosh. First time in my married life. We've been married 30 years. Now, all that said, what about right to work? Now, when I was not working, I still worked. I worked looking for a job. I worked helping people. I did work. I did what I could. My work was going to work out unemployment insurance. My work was, so I did have work, even though I wasn't employed. Now, when we talk about right to work, I do think that when we look at the Acts 2 community, for example, by the way, I want to just be clear here. I'm all about social justice. I'm all about it, but justice. I sometimes those words. I'm about social justice. I'm about social humility. I'm about social mercy. It's not just this. Sometimes justice. Sometimes it feels to me like people are trying to address systemic issues through our government. And that's what that means. And I want to say, okay, yeah, let's make better laws. But really what I'm doing is if I really want to look like my Messiah, I must be like my Messiah in all things. Therefore, if I have means to help my brother or sister in Messiah as a part of the ecclesia where I can give them good, valid work, and I can provide for them, then I need to be doing that because my money is not my money. It's God's money. My resources are God's resources. And so many times in my individual expression of the ecclesia, what happens is, well, hey, you've got your money and those people have got their money and never the two shall meet. We shouldn't be thinking like that in the ecclesia. We are together in this, and we need to do a better job at employing, however you want to think about that, employing our brothers and sisters in Messiah. So, yeah, these are, as far as a right, I have a sister, and, she thinks, she doesn't live by me now, but my sister used to live next to my parents, but she thought my dad's mower was her mower. I mean, she could just take whatever she wants, right? So I think that there's a sense in which in the body of Messiah, we need to loosen our grip on our money and our things and to be a little more sharing, a little more us in that. Then we can Sabbath together because the whole package is right. So again, I want to reiterate, like with with James when he talks about true religion is the kind that cares for orphans and widows. This is social justice, biblical social justice, where the orphan, when he's talking about that, he's saying, hey, you can't just pay lip service to worshiping God, to being with this God. It's got to have tangible expression in the world. And if it's going to have tangible expression, everyone in the community of God must be able to Sabbath. And if you're going to do that, real rest, you're going to confess sins to one another. You're going to care for one another's needs. You are going to address in as much as it is incumbent upon you or your community to address the social needs of the people in your community. Everyone wants to be the Acts 2 church until you realize what they had to do to make that all happen. And then Ananias and Sapphira botched it up pretty good. So I know I get a little heated here. But
no, I totally agree. And the idea of the church stepping into the social justice arena, like you're saying, it's about the kingdom of God. So if that's what we're trying to establish here, or help establish and continue that establishment that Jesus started, we can't say, well, this is the side we're picking, and all of the, if we're talking conservative liberal, like we have to just kind of stick with what's on this side, because we have to pick a side. Well, we don't have to pick a side, or we pick Jesus. That's what we do.
Yeah, that's what I do.
Yeah. So we say, okay, well, what can we do? Can we make use of what's on this side in order to help establish more of the kingdom? Can we use, what's on this side as well? We use what we can, we do what we can, but it can never be something that it's not our place to step in. I don't think there's anything we can say, well, the church has no business in that, or the church should not be, working in this area, or that's a government issue, or because if it's on earth, it's a church issue, and if it's involving humans, it's a church issue. And so we're never going to solve everything. We can't. We're still here on this human form. We're waiting for Christ to come and solve everything, but we can certainly do as much as we can, and we can certainly take on the hard things, take on the things that the world doesn't want to, and to say, and to put it at the front, and to say, no, you have to look at this. Everybody has to see what's happening here. And we're trying to do this to alleviate it. And we're trying to do this to support those that are on the negative end or receiving end of that injustice. And so that's what I mean, where the church steps in, like to make things visible, to make things aware, and to do as much as we can.
Yes. If I might theologize for just a second here, it's so important to me. In the Garden of Eden, we had shalom. It was messed up.
I forgot I was going to bring up that word because I was thinking it as you were talking.
Well, that's the goal of that's the goal of Sabbath, is shalom. For reals, it's not just about. It's a quality of rest that is the sort of rest that is we're right with God and God's creation. And I think we need to ask ourselves again, for me, theologically, why is this a part of the Mosaic covenant? Or the Sinaitic covenant, which is what I will call it, because the covenant that Yahweh made was not with Moses, it was Israel. Mm-hmm. And for me, in my particular theological rubric, is that I would just proof text Romans 9, 10, 11, that I'm grafted into the Commonwealth of Israel. So that said, when the Israelites came out of Egypt, they had this Passover lamb experience. And it was by the blood of a lamb that they were released from Egypt. It is by the blood of the lamb that I am released from my sin. I'm released from an old Traver, an old way of doing things. Mm-hmm. Well, if you trace out from the time that they came out of Egypt to Sinai, it's 50 days. And I can't say definitively it was 50 days because the text doesn't actually say, but if you map it out, it's 50 days. You can see it. Anyone can do their homework, work through the days all the way up to when they received the law. It's 50 days. Well, what do you know? They made that golden calf thing and it wasn't good for 3,000 people. But then on another 50-day period. Jesus dies on the cross, raises from the grave. 50 days later, 3,000 are saved at Pentecost, or Shavuot in Hebrew. And they have this experience of now the Spirit is in them. And by the Spirit, they are now given what was impossible for them to do at Sinai. They couldn't obey rightly. They didn't have the Spirit. Now, I'm not going to, this is another theological conversation as well. I do think that David had the Spirit, and that Abraham had the Spirit, and that Deborah had the Spirit, and Esther had the Spirit. But there was something qualitative that happened at Pentecost, where the Spirit came into those believers, and it was almost a Sinai experience all over again. If you look at the New Covenant, read it in Jeremiah 31, verses 31 through around 34, that now the law, the Torah, is being written on our hearts. And what does that fundamentally mean? It means to love God, love neighbor. And the Spirit's role is to be in us. And now when we love God, love neighbor, when we, and not just pay lip service to this cerebral, I love God, but James is saying, no. All of it is the law of liberty. And if you're going to do it right, here's what's going to start happening in a lot of people's vernacular: social justice. You will have mercy on orphan and widow. It will start playing out in your communities, and it will be your wisdom and your understanding. And when people see the church operating the way it's supposed to be operating, they will go, what a wise and understanding people this is. And look at them confessing their sin. And the goal here is to enter via the Sabbath, Yahweh Shalom. And that's the goal of, that's the outcome of worship. The goal of worship is to exalt Jesus. But the outcome of worship is a life filled with shalom. And it plays out. And when I say it plays out, one of the ways it plays out is a political thing that we do. We say no to the world and yes to a physical resting in the Sabbath. In the same way that I'm not going to etherealize, don't commit adultery. I have to actually not commit it too. I'm not going to etherealize not stealing. I'm actually not going to steal too. I mean, the physical and the spiritual are melded together. And so, Sabbath and all that, you're totally right. So the social justice part, you can't really find yourself in Sabbath-keeping shalom if we are not addressing the needs of the people around us, where we are moving through reconciliation, moving through caring for one another's needs. And this is exactly what we read about in Acts 2 and 4. Got it right. It's awesome. Laura, you get the last word. What do you think?
Well, I just want everyone to know that the Sabbath has been a lifesaver for me, both figuratively and literally. And there's a mystery to it sometimes, because you don't know. Sabbath can elevate you to a place with God, but it can also ground you at the same time in who we are as a community. And so it's just beautiful.
Well, I totally agree. It is beautiful. I haven't run across anybody, if I say, hey, what do you think about a day of rest? You in shalom and right standing with your community, with Yahweh, watching orphan and widow get taken care of. I think everyone is pro this. And if we do Sabbath right, these are the things that are all wrapped up in that concept. And it brings us into a right narrative. And if we're doing it by the Spirit, we're going to exalt Jesus in the process. And that's what we should be about as we worship. I want to say thank you, Laura, for talking with me and having good and I want to say, going out here, how respectful, and even though we did bring up some that could be heated topics, You handled that with me so nicely, and I think we talked about it in a nice, constructive way. So thank you, Laura.
Well, thank you. Yes, and thank you for this opportunity. I wasn't sure what it was going to look like, but
Me neither.
I like it. Let's do it again.
Perfect. I'll dial you in. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.